Hello, everybody. My name is DJ, and I like to draw. For as long as I can remember, I've been in love with superheroes. And some of the most well-known superheroes are the ones made by Marvel and DC Comics. Today I'm going to combine the most famous teams from each side. Marvel's Avengers and DC's Justice League. Starting off with some of my favorite heroes from each team, Iron Man and Superman. Anthony Kent was adopted by his parents, Howard and Maria Kent, after crash landing on their farm as an infant. The couple had always wanted kids, but due to Howard's time working with radioactive materials as a military scientist, they were unable to have biological children of their own. Seeing him as a gift from God, they raised him to the best of their ability. Early on, they knew there was something very special about young Tony. The kid was an engineering prodigy with an otherworldly connection to machinery. Parents always made sure to lead him towards using this gift to help others and to not let it make him feel superior to other people. Tony eventually started his own company selling ultra-efficient solar panels of his own design, becoming the multi-millionaire CEO of Kent Industries. All was going well until he took a trip to donate some of his panels to the war-torn nation of Karak, where he was captured by the Bialian military. They forced him to use his intellect to convert his panels into weapons of mass destruction, all while shrapnel was lodged in his chest. Tony proceeded to make a weapon unlike anything they'd ever seen. But not for them. After about a week, Tony Kent emerged from the cave in a clunky blue metal suit as the invincible Steelman. With the ability to run faster than a locomotive, jump higher than a building, and bend steel like putty, Steelman Mark I was more than enough to help him escape his captors. Upon returning to the States, Tony immediately sought medical attention. After some time in the hospital, he'd been given the dire news that the damage done to his heart was inoperable. Tony decided to spend what little time he had left with the ones he loved. Once they were given the devastating news, Howard and Maria knew it was finally time to tell their son something they were putting off telling him for decades. They told him he was adopted, but there was a tad more to it than that. They took Tony to the barn and revealed a secret compartment. Inside it was the very ship that he had arrived on Earth as an infant. They explained to him how they found him on that fateful night. Awestruck, Tony walked closer to the alien machine, and upon laying his hand on it, a message was beamed directly into his brain. Among other information, he learned about his home planet, Starton, and how his connection to technology was baked directly into his DNA. He also discovered how he only began to scratch the surface of his potential. Tony immediately began to disassemble the spacecraft and started working tirelessly for the dwindling days he had left building something with the parts. He'd made himself a new heart, made from what was left of his homeworld. With his own life saved, he began to dedicate his life to saving others. To do so, his old suit would need a few upgrades, and Tony had a secret fortress built in the Arctic to work without blowing his cover. Over the next few models, Tony would add laser blasters, rocket thrusters, X-ray goggles, and freeze rays among other upgrades. He also added an invisible force field around his head as opposed to a metal helmet to show the world that behind the suit he was no god to be worshipped or a despot to be feared, but someone who just simply wanted to fight for truth, justice, and a better tomorrow. Alright, fun fact, this is actually not my first time drawing the Man of Iron. My first time drawing was actually back in like 2022 for a Popcross Studios community redraw. And let's just say I'm glad my art's improved a little bit since then. I originally went with these two characters because the idea of fusing two characters with such wildly different backstories and power sets felt like a fun challenge. Also, it was really fun to balance this red, blue, and yellow color scheme. And as for the name, I simply combined Iron Man with Superman's nickname, Man of Steel, which I thought was pretty clever. Poses for these guys are just going to be standard A poses for right now, but I intend to do one big art piece with the entire Avengers League once I make a video about the rest of the team. These boring poses made for a fun challenge, trying to make the characters feel alive with the rendering alone while they're just kind of just like standing there. And speaking of rendering, I just kind of like forgot to record the shading, not the shading, the highlights for Steelman. So oops, it's my first video. Be nice. Like I went to take my dog out for a walk, and then when I came back, I just like forgot to hit record on OBS. And with that, I feel like we're done with our first member of the Avenging League, Tony Kent, aka Steelman. And going from characters that have completely different backstories to pretty similar ones, we have the Princess of Themyscira, Wonder Woman, and the God of Thunder, Thor. Diana Odin's daughter was the child of the Asgardian king Odin and the queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. She was raised by her mother on the all-female island of Themyscira during the earlier years of her life with no knowledge of her Asgardian heritage, only to be raised as an Amazonian warrior. All was well and good on the island until her early teens, when a strange man in red and green suit fell from the sky onto the coast of her home. Diana went to check on the strange individual, who appeared to have lost an arm during the fall. The man was murmuring something about a captain in some sort of mask while Diana was tending to his wounds. She wouldn't be able to hear the full story, however, as the authorities found her with a man on the island before he could fully regain consciousness. Knowing full well that no one would believe the story of him falling from the sky, she pleaded guilty to smuggling him into Themyscira and was promptly exiled. Shortly after arriving on the mainland, a bridge of refracted light extended from the heavens. With nothing left to lose, Diana walked across the suspiciously timed bridge to the realm of Asgard, where she was surprised to be welcomed with open arms. She was greeted by a bearded man with an eye patch who introduced himself as Odin. He explained to her that he was her father, and how they were deities, but not from the pantheon she knew. He introduced her to her stepmother Frigga and stepsister Soroki, and finally he had a gift for her. It was a sword, a massive one. She went to grab it but couldn't lift it. Odin let her know that it was only made to be lifted by those who were worthy. He assured her, though, that while she may not be worthy yet, he had no doubt that she would one day be able to lift it with ease. As the years went by, Diana had grown into a powerful warrior. She was strong, agile, and cunning, but her power had led her to grow arrogant. Her arrogance would not go unnoticed by her father, who made the tough decision of returning her to Midgard, stripped of her powers and memories until she learned humility. Awakening on Earth, some of the only remnants of her memory she could grasp were the title of princess and her name Diana, which were so foggy that she believed her name to be Donna Prince. While retaining nothing but her medical skills learned from her stepmother and combative skills learned from her father, she came to the conclusion that she must be either a soldier or a surgeon, and worked her way to becoming a combat medic. One day, while her platoon was flying over the Mediterranean Sea, something struck the aircraft so hard that it split in two. She was unable to parachute out in time and was knocked unconscious midair. When she came to, she found herself watched ashore on a strange island with her fellow medic, Jane Trevor, who was still out cold. While bringing Jane and herself to safety, Donna couldn't shake a weird sense of familiarity with this place. Upon finding civilization, she was surprised to find that it was inhabited exclusively by women. Not too long later, she was asked to meet with the queen, who referred to her as if she was her daughter. Donna had to break the news to her that even if she somehow was her daughter, she couldn't remember any part of her life before the age of 20 anyway. Queen Hippolyta was determined to prove to her that she was an Amazon, and to start she would have her lift a strange object that had recently landed in the middle of the town that was so heavy that not even 10 other highly trained Amazonian warriors could lift. Doubtful, Donna grasped the object by what looked like a hilt, and was struck by lightning, repeatedly. During the onslaught, her fatigues faded away and were replaced by Asgardian armor. She went from being unable to lift it, to barely able to budge it, to easily lifting it, to effortlessly doing it, before finally being able to lift the sword without even laying a single finger on it. A final blast of lightning erupted from her body as she regained her memories. Remembering where she was, Diana broke into tears. She embraced her mother, telling her how much she missed her while living in Asgard. While catching up with each other, Hippolyta announced that Diana was now unexiled from Themyscira and gave her daughter a few parting gifts before returning her to the world of men. Two indestructible bracelets and a regal upgrade to her helmet to represent her Amazonian heritage, as well as a golden lasso with the ability to shock those who tell lies. Being accepted back in both Themyscira and Asgard, the willing storm cleaver with ease, Diana, daughter of the All-Father Odin, and the warrior Queen Hippolyta, had finally become the mighty Thunder Woman. I know this was a really fun design challenge, especially with her weapon. I was originally going to go with like some sort of battle axe maybe until I read Absolute Wonder Woman. I know the whole point of the Absolute series is to like change like fundamental parts of the character, but I just got done reading Absolute Wonder Woman at the time of me drawing this, so I decided, hey, I'm just gonna add like a few elements from that character because I just really love that design. Also, originally I wasn't sure whether or not I was gonna give her a cape or not because Thor's cape looks a lot like Superman's cape, and I didn't want them looking characters looking too similar. So I ended up just like shortening the cape a bit and giving it like that little like white outline that you see like around her skirt, so it kind of matches that. Also, I was debating whether or not to actually like have her holding the lasso of truth or not because it was like really a pain to draw. But eventually, I just kind of like pushed through, and eventually, it ended up looking, pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Originally, I was gonna have like the sword like tied to her back with the lasso, and she could use like, how like Thor can move his hammer around with his mind. I was gonna have her do that with the sword, and so she could like fly around that way, which I thought was kind of a fun and unique way to do that. But it kind of like obscured the sword a little bit more than I would like it to. But I really like the pose where it is right now, where she's kind of like holding it behind her head. I think it shows up the sword a bit more. Uh, I really love like doing the lightning effects around it. I've been working on doing that, working on my lightning effects for a little bit, and I've really come to love where it kind of is now, with a little bit of like a subtle colored glow around like a white, just like basic, just like white lines. Also, the story is a pretty fun challenge to come up with Wonder Woman being based off of like Greek mythology, and Thor being like a Norse god. Uh, Pretty fun challenge to work with that. Also, I may have thrown in a character from our next character story, kind of tie them together a little bit. And with that, we have the second member of our Avenging League, the mighty Diana Ordensdaughter, otherwise known as Thunder Woman. And with two-thirds of DC's big trinity already out of the way, I think it's time to do Captain Prep Time himself, Batman, who's getting combined with the first Avenger himself, Captain America. Bruce Rogers was born to Irish immigrants Thomas and Martha Rogers in 1920's Queenham, New Jersey. The Rogers family was far from affluent, but for Bruce's 8th birthday, they managed to save up just enough money to take him to see a moving picture. The kid was thrilled and couldn't stop going off about his favorite parts of the movie on the walk home. Unfortunately, the theater was being a very xenophobic part of Queenham, so the family tried to hurry home before sundown. Bruce made the suggestion to cut through an alleyway to get there faster, a choice he'd soon immensely regret. Halfway through the passage, an angry man with a gun started yelling at them for trespassing. Thomas tried reasoning with the man, but upon hearing his accent, the stranger grew even more enraged. In a panic, Martha tried to grab the gun, but failed. The man proceeded to kill both of Bruce's parents, but the poor kid managed to escape. Roger spent the next decade of his life living on the streets, learning to survive on wood alone. The kid never grew very strong, and had to rely on gadgets he made from scraps and garbage to protect himself and other street urchins. Around his teen years, there had been a spike in hate-induced violence in Queenham, inspired by the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. He should never give up fighting against intolerance, but would only barely manage to survive most fights with a makeshift grappling hook or a smoke pellet. These tools had given him enough of an advantage in survival to make it to the age of 18. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the United States entered World War II on the side of the Allies, and Bruce jumped at the opportunity to enlist. During basic training, Bruce's commanding officers were underwhelmed with his physical capabilities. At 5'2" and 90 pounds, it was a miracle they even let him join in the first place. But they kept pushing the scrawny twig of a man, but he just wouldn't snap. His gumption would not go unnoticed, and Rogers would be one of the first selected for a top-secret project. Project Lazarus was intended as a way for a soldier with the unyielding drive like Rogers to have physical prowess to back it up. The project began by having him master various fighting styles from around the world, from boxing to sumo wrestling to capoeira. Next, he would learn to master every weapon known to man, as well as operate every single vehicle known. Eventually, Rogers was ready for the final step of Project Lazarus. A man was put into what resembled a modern-day Iron Maiden with syringes for spikes and hooked up to countless wires. After about an hour of being juiced up in that metal coffin, it finally powered down. Bruce ripped the doors off their titanium hinges and emerged as a 6'9" hulking super soldier. Next, it was time for the fun stuff. He needed a persona. Rather than wear camouflage, Bruce would represent his nation in a bright red, white, and blue costume to draw fire away from the non-enhanced soldiers. But in addition to being eye-catching, he would also need to be fear-inducing. The idea team was stumped until Bat managed to fly into their quarters, scaring the daylights out of them, but also giving them the idea to add an animalistic element to the costume. With the costume out of the way, Captain Bat would work alongside scientist Howard Kent in developing his toolkit. He went with smoke pellets and a grappling gun to remind himself of where he came from, as well as a star-shaped shurikens to match the theming of his costume. Kent had numerous ideas for weapons, including high-powered machine guns, experimental laser blasters, and even some melee options. Cap rejected all of them. He had joined to protect those in need, and not to be a mindless killer mulling down foes. Plus, there would be no rumors of a star-spangled bat to keep the Axe's powers up at night if there were no one left alive to spread them. He requested a shield instead so he could protect his allies who were actually doing the shooting. With a bat head-shaped vibrocalcum shield in hand, Captain Bat was finally ready for duty. Rogers would be assigned to work with a group called the Invader Society of America, alongside other heroes such as Human Inferno, Toronado, Hornet Man, and the Splash, among others, to combat the Axis supervillain team, the Hydra Brigade. Captain Bat will work closely with a young man named Richard Robert Barnes, who had no powers of his own but managed to make it on the team anyway with his raw skill only. After a few years of working with the ISA, Captain Robbie were sent to a secret Hydra base off the eastern side of the northern coast of Africa. The dynamic duo made their way to the center of the base, where they were stopped by Hydra Brigade's leader, the Red Mask. They had developed a nuclear missile that could wipe out an entire city in a single explosion. Mask then proceeded to launch the weapon of mass destruction towards Washington, D.C., with the duo tied to it. About halfway through the Mediterranean Sea, Cap managed to use one of his shurikens to cut through the ropes enough to free his hands. He then used his grapple gun to try to remove the payload from the rocket, but missed and forced open the fuel hatch by mistake. The leaking fuel inadvertently freed the two from their bindings, but Robbie didn't have a grappling gun to hold on and flew off into the sea as Bruce failed to grab his hand in time. Losing Robbie made Bruce feel like a part of him had just died inside, but he had no time to mourn with thousands of lives at stake. Unable to remove the payload, his next best option was to redirect it. The Bat gradually managed to bend the fins of the rocket in such a way where the nuke would be headed directly north, into the Arctic, where the bomb would be frozen, but along with our hero. Eventually, he's woken by a man in a blue metal suit who appeared to be starstruck. Captain Matt asked him which side of the war he was on, and the man told him the war had been over for over 70 years. After catching up over half a century's worth of history, Bruce's new acquaintance would help him set up with a lavish home in his hometown of Queenham, as well as hiring him as a bodyguard so he'd have a steady source of income. With the war won, it was now time for the Starry Knight to undo the evil within his own country, starting in the city where his journey began nearly a century ago. Right, now that story was fun to write. Just to give you a little peel behind the curtain, I already have like all of the members of the Avenging League already drawn. In fact, I've finished the last one all the way back in like April 23rd. But I still have yet to draw the characters of Robbie, Human Inferno, Tornado, and all of them. So let me know in the future if you want me to do an Invaders Society of America video. And with that, we have our American hero, the Starry Knight, Captain Bat. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to do the entire Avenging League team in just one video. Instead, I'm going to end this one off with a bang by combining the most overpowered characters from each side: DC's Scarlet Speedster, The Flash, and Marvel's Verdant Vanquisher, the Hulk. Dr. Bartholomew Barry Banner was raised by his parents, Henry and Nora. Barry had always struggled with time management, and his father made it very clear of how unfond he was of this trait through abuse. Said abuse would lead to young Barry developing anger issues of his own later in life. Things would eventually go from awful to horrible after his mother's untimely passing. She appeared to have been beaten and set on fire, and her abusive husband would be the number one suspect. Henry beating Nora wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but the whole burning part felt fishy to Barry. Henry may have been an abusive drunk, but he was no arsonist. When it came time to appear in court, Barry believed the morally correct thing to do was vouch for his father's innocence, so the authorities could actually catch this potential serial arsonist, but instead committed perjury by testifying against him, as the thought of living alone with that monster would give any child nightmares. Barry would live with various other family members until finally landing a job in the United States military developing nuclear weapons in El Centro, New Mexico. It seemed as things were finally going well in Barry's life for a change. His father was behind bars, he had a steady job, his anger management was getting under control, and he was planning on proposing to his girlfriend, Betty West. One night, the Army was testing a new gamma radiation powered lightning cannon against targets on a testing field. Barry was getting ready for the end of his shift when suddenly the weapon's targeting goes absurdly off course and decimates his entire laboratory. The scientist miraculously survives and awakens inside of a crater, naked, on the other side of the Mojave. The military believed they had inadvertently built a teleporter, but were unable to recreate the results on any non-living target. Over the next few weeks, there would be reports of green flashes of light destroying everything in their path across the desert and surrounding areas. Barry had no time to worry about that, though, as his anger management skills were beginning to regress to the point where he was even blacking out in anger. Coming home from therapy one day, he turned on the news to see that someone had managed to get a clear picture of what had been causing these chartreuse anomalies. It appeared to be a giant, unclothed, hulking man with green skin, but that wasn't even the most shocking part to Barry. Looking towards the monster's face, he saw that it was his own. Horrified, Barry was able to connect that the flashes would occur more often when his anger was worse, and concluded that he must have turned into this atrocity whenever he lost his temper. Afraid of harming his loved ones, Barry would abandon his current life and start a new one, attempting to live off the land, far away from civilization. After several months of barely being able to survive in the Rockies, Barry began to realize that he wasn't much of a hunter or forager, and bit the bullet to make his way back to civilization to buy some food with what little money he had left. Upon reaching a diner, he sat down and noticed that his old home of El Centro was on the news. A giant mutant gorilla was rampaging through the part of town where Betty lived. Fearing for his former partner's life, Banner blacked out. But this time was different. Barry could see faint, brief glimpses of what was happening. He saw himself making it to El Centro, finding the gorilla creature, and protecting Betty from it. Seeing this green, monstrous version of himself save lives gave Barry hope that this curse, this connection to some sort of gamma force, may be a blessing in disguise. As Barry worked on reintegrating himself back into society, he would use his engineering skills to develop a heroic identity for the Beast. Inspired by having similar speed to one of his favorite superheroes growing up as a kid, the Splash, Dr. Banner would give his alternate form the title of the Smash, along with a ring that could transform into a costume with a similar lightning bolt motif after he transformed. Dr. Barry Banner knew that he may never have full control over his monstrous half, but maybe one day he could become skilled enough at steering him to make the Smash the most incredible hero the world's ever seen. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room, the name. Yes, I know. It's amazing. Genius. Thank you. In all seriousness, though, I really like the name. In fact, I thought of the name before even designing the character. Speaking of design, I decided to go with a purple first costume instead of like the normal red from the Flash, because I felt like it kind of clashed a little bit too much with Hulk's iconic green skin. So I just went with purple, coming from how Hulk normally wears kind of like a purplish, indigo-ish like shorts. With that out of the way, we have our monstrous speed demon, the Smash. Here we have the first half of our Avenging League: Steelman, Thunder Woman, Captain Bat, and the Smash. Looking back, there are a few things I might change if I redraw these characters, like adding white stripes on Thunder Woman's boots to match Wonder Woman's, or adding like the scale texture to Captain Bat's armor, but overall I'm pretty satisfied. I've been wanting to do more Marvel DC fusions ever since I participated in that Popcross Studios community redraw back in December of like 22. In addition to that, I've always wanted to get into YouTube making like art videos, inspired by people like Popcross Studios or Esteban Carrero. So I decided to just, kill two birds with one stone. Obviously, the next video I'm going to do is going to be part 2 of the Avenging League, as I've already finished drawing the whole team. Please let me know which Marvel and DC characters slash teams you'd like to see me fuse next. Also, as a little bit of an engagement bait, I'm going to be shouting out the names of commenters who correctly guessed who the heroes and villains I didn't draw were supposed to be fusions of. And if you like my art well enough to endure over 20 minutes of me stammering through my lines, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. And with all that out of the way, I'll see y'all next time in Avenging League Part 2. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.